have a couple thoughts. I'll sort of visualize in my mind the new grad from Gonzaga who's about 23 years old, who's technically very, very savvy, who takes a job at Sacred Heart or Holy Family or Mount Carmel or St. Joseph over there. Over here, wherever. Yeah. And something's wrong. Something's not right. And if somehow the system responds with that's how we do it, then it's time to try to speak to someone else. And it may be me, but sometimes if you don't get the answer from the first person you speak to, then it's time to speak to someone else. But if I had any advice for any nurse entering the clinical environment, it's stay connected to your peers. So don't ever let yourself be alone. What I watch in the most vulnerable window post-graduation for any nurse throughout their career is the first about 28 to 32 months, a little under 3 years. Stay connected to your peers who are going through the same journey. Find a mentor. And it may not be your clinical manager. It may be a senior nurse that you know on another unit. It may be another clinical manager. And if you can't find one, ask for one. Say to your peers, do you guys know anybody who's been here for a long time who I could just like take to lunch now and then to say, how do I deal with the fact that this thing isn't right? Or could I work on a project to make this better? Because if I can tell you story after story after story of where one nurse speaking up changed the whole system. I'll give you a great example. Before I was in this job, I was in the Oregon region. We have used Hospira IV tubing and IV bags since the dawn of time. If you can imagine how much money we give that company since we have a contract for the whole system. And somewhere, the engineers in Hospira decided to re-engineer the stopcock. Now those things happen all the time. Re-engineering happens, things get better. But every time they do, the company has to let us know something's different. And usually we ask them to make it a different color, make the package different, so we know something has changed, and we've always endorsed that yes, it's better. Well, Hospira re-engineered the stopcocks in the IV tubing, but didn't think it would make any difference. So the packages didn't change, how it looked didn't change, and some nurses at one of our larger hospitals in Oregon realized suddenly that in a PSU, the patients who were supposed to be on a to keep open drip were getting more fluid than they should. Now these are expert nurses who don't look at the stopcock when they're, you know, changing drip rates. They just do it by feel. We all did. And something was wrong. So then they noticed it was happening on more than one shift in their unit. So they called our people who called the vendor, and then they said, you know, you probably got a bad lot. Pull them off the shelf. That happens. Something's defective. That you immediately notify the supplier and pull it off the shelf. So they did. They went across to one of our other hospitals and brought in a new batch. Same thing happened. Next, they watched what happened to some of their patients going out of the PSU into the ward. And some weird things were happening with volumes that patients were getting. Long story short, what had happened is they had changed the way just the silly little lever moves up and down with the tubing such that it didn't lock the way it usually did and how they were used to making sure it was closed. The company denied that it had changed anything. Denied it. But because those nurses in the PACU said, no, we've been at this for a long time, something's wrong, and would not back down, we, Providence, eventually saved lives in our system, Yale, Mayo, some of the largest health systems in the United States, because instantly our suppliers started talking, or excuse me, our vendors internally, vendor managers, started talking to some of their peers saying, are you hearing anything weird with stopcocks? And eventually the corporate headquarters of Hospira had to come to Oregon on their jets and admit that they had done this. It did, it wasn't anything they concealed. It just didn't seem to make a difference. They just kind of fixed something, and that product went away. But if those nurses, with as strong clinical background as they had and the years of experience they had to know this is not how it's supposed to be when I do TKO, this is how it feels. I'm not stupid. Now, Had they not spoken up, they would have been part of that 40% because we would have had a sentinel event. At least 3 or 4 patients got volume overloaded. If it had been an 85-year-old post very complex surgery, we probably would have killed him. So they did not get angry. They did not threaten. They held their ground and said, we are telling you something is very wrong. We've gone through the process. You pulled that bad lot off. You gave us another. The same thing happened again. We have been doing this for years. We are not going to stop saying this, document it, and reporting it until you come and see this. Now, it just so happened on the day that all this started happening, my partner, who did all of quality and practice for nursing, was on vacation. I happened to be in the office. And literally, the guy in our office that oversees products ran in, hung 2 bags, one with the old, one with the new, and said, Debbie, can you tell the difference? And it didn't take me long. Yes, of course I could. He said, thank you, that's all I need, and out he went. But had those nurses not done what they did, Hospira probably never would have owned up to the problem, and somebody would have been killed. And so don't ever think that one nurse, I've had new graduates find things that are just wrong and respectfully bring them to the attention because they have a different set of eyes. They're not part of the culture that's been working together for 15, 20 years where this is just how we do it, and we sort of sometimes go numb. So I always say, if you can be more like a servant leader and be more introspective and step back and watch and think and imagine, what could I do today to make my patients stay safer, better? You sometimes will attend to some of those things that have just become how you do work. And the new graduates are who we depend on, or newly hired nurses, new to the team, are sometimes who become those eyes and ears. Sometimes it's me showing up. Could you explain to me why you do that? I'll say, I guess we never thought of that. You know, just things that pop out to me, a new set of eyes. I had one of my nurse educator that worked for me in a former position had come to Oregon working at Mayo Clinic. And she had worked on a large orthopedics unit, and Mayo is known for orthopedics, bring people from all over the world. And they had a practice that I still try to instill today, that each time she entered a patient's room or exited it, she stopped in the doorway, touched the door itself, and thought to herself, did I do absolutely everything for that patient that I should have? And when she entered, it's, I am going in to do the following things, and these are the things that I'll replay in my mind before I walk out. This is not about charting. This is not about the checkoff list. It's centering yourself and making that patient the focus, and nothing else matters. And when you can imagine yourself as the difference between that patient being in its very fragile bubble moving through our system or the bubble popping, those kind of pauses and reflecting will make the difference in safety, but also help each nurse feel empowered that they are the difference, because they are. That's why I get to do the job I do. I love it, because I know that once every nurse feels at the bedside how empowered they are, care will be better instantly. I know that.